Welcome, warriors. I was introduced to today's guest by my previous guest, Jillian. I love how podcasting works. Grab a tissue and learn how she responded to cancer diagnosis at a young age. Let's rock.
Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words.
Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. April Johnson Stearns is the founder and editor-in-chief of Wildfire magazine and writing community. A lifelong writer who landed her first memoir-based magazine cover story at just 16, April worked for her college newspaper and then went on to work for her local newspaper, The Sentinel, in Santa Cruz, California. Before long, she was lured to other writing jobs in Silicon Valley during the tech boom of the early 2000s. However, in 2012, in the midst of this career, April was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer at age 35. 4 years later, while struggling to go back to normal and find others in similar circumstances, April launched Wildfire magazine and writing community as a way for younger people to tell and read breast cancer stories. Since 2016, April has guided hundreds of writers through the Wildfire writing workshops, and she's published more than 50 issues of Wildfire magazine. April believes strongly that helping others tell their stories has the dramatic effect of turning a traumatic cancer experience into an empowering one. April lives with her husband and young daughter in Santa Cruz. Although she loves town life, she also likes to get away from the hustle and bustle whenever she can, to hike in the woods. But writing memoir remains April's purest escape. Now, before we hear April's journey, here is a review from Rod Speedy, who writes, "So needed. This is a great resource for recovering and healing from past trauma. So encouraging." Thank you, Rod Speedy. I am grateful that you see this podcast as a resource. Thank you for your kind words. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your comments and your star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. Now, also come join the Facebook community, the Warrior Words Facebook community. We will have inspirational stories and lessons learned and beauty bombs. Just go to facebook.com/groups/Warrior Words and request to join. There are a few questions that will pop up after hitting request. Please answer those, and I look forward to getting to know you over there. Now, on to the show. Hi, everyone. As you heard in the intro, I have April Stearns with us today, and I want to thank you, April, for coming on and giving your time with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Heather. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Well, thank you. And as we were talking before we hit record, you and I met through Jillian, who I had on a few episodes ago. And it was just so, it's just so interesting how, and I think you used the phrase how the dots connect and how, how one interaction can lead to another and another. And I think like a ripple, like when you throw a stone in the river or the pond. Um, so the reason that you and Jillian and I all know of each other is that we were all diagnosed with breast cancer.
That's
And
right.
yeah, and that's, while it's not anything anybody wishes and a club that nobody wants to join, um, I think it's definitely brought us together, and it brings so many people together. But I think there's still a lot that people don't understand. So if we could start with you sharing your story and how you were diagnosed, because you have a little bit of a different story than I do.
Absolutely. Well, and isn't it interesting how varied our stories are in that context of something so familiar to each of us? And I just think it's so interesting to learn each person's diagnosis story because it really can be very varied.
Yes.
So my story started in 2012. I almost stumbled there because it's been so long at this point. Um, but 12 years ago now for me, I was diagnosed after finding my lump while breastfeeding one night. I was 35 years old, just barely. Actually, I found my lump while 34. I ended up getting diagnosed about a week after my birthday. And fortunately for me, it was a fairly swift experience from finding that lump one night to getting diagnosed. I hear now all the time of people, especially who are diagnosed on the younger side, having a delayed diagnosis. And certainly my care team hoped that my lump was a cyst or something related to breastfeeding and
Mhm.
not cancer. But
Right.
they also fortunately got me on that conveyor belt and through that process of getting the diagnosis. So, yes, I found my lump one night while breastfeeding. I immediately went into the bedroom after putting my daughter down to sleep and asked my husband to feel it and said, "What is this? Have you ever felt that?" And I remember the blood just draining out of his face. And he was like, "What is that? No, I don't know what that is." And by the time I finally sat down with my oncologist and, we're getting to the course of action that was going to be laid out for me, I did get confirmation that it probably hadn't been there for very long. By the time I felt that lump and it was, biopsied, measured, et cetera, it was a 7 centimeter lump. It was quite large. And, I have large breasts. So, it took a while to get to the surface, I guess, or to get to that point of being able
Yeah.
to be felt. But it was also a HER2 positive breast cancer, which is fast growing, I now know. And so I appreciated him saying, it probably wasn't there a month ago, because I think our first reaction is to start wondering, what did I do wrong? How did this happen to me? And part of that is, did I miss something? Was I not diligent? But because I was breastfeeding, I was pretty familiar with my breasts, I would say at that point, and especially in touching them more probably than ever in my life, just because of that, learning how to breastfeed and all of that. And
Right.
so when he said, it probably wasn't there, I just decided I'll trust him on that. And so from there, I went straight into treatment. I was diagnosed stage 3C. And like I said, HER2 positive. We started with chemo. And then I had a unilateral mastectomy with flat closure, which means that I opted against having breast mound reconstruction. And so I live half flat on my left side and have lived half flat since then. So 12 years now. And I also went through a radiation, about 35 rounds of radiation.
Wow. Yeah.
One thing that people don't know with a HER2 positive breast cancer that is hormone negative, you don't go through any of the, we call them AIs, and I'm losing that word. But the hormone
The
therapies that you,
aromatase inhibitors,
there you go.
because
That's
I'm
it.
on one.
Yes. Okay. So, yes, I didn't have to do that. I did do Herceptin for a full 13 months after my diagnosis for that HER2 receptor. But since then, I've been very fortunate to have been cancer free and out of treatment since about April 2013.
Wow. Wow. Praise
Yes.
God. Yes.
Yes. Exactly.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and it is interesting because you brought up the point of you question yourself. Did I miss something? And was I not diligent enough? And I think we're now at least I think in the last 20-25 years, we have really been conditioned from puberty on, maybe, check your breasts, do the self exams. When you get to be 40, go have your mammograms annually. And we do become more familiar with our breasts, I think, than in generations past. And especially when you're
Sure.
breastfeeding, there's there's a lot of movement and manipulation that you have to do to care for your child. So yeah, I had a similar fast, from diagnosis to the operating table, but it took me a while because I knew I had something, and I had a doctor
Mhm.
tell me to wait 6 months because they couldn't find it on the mammogram and they couldn't find it on an ultrasound.
Okay. Mm,
And then I
mhm,
was still stage 2B
mhm.
afterwards, when they finally got it out. Well, all four of them. So
Goodness. Yes.
so you have been no evidence of disease since all of your treatments. How did any one of the treatments impact you maybe more than the others? Or wait, let me actually back up, because you mentioned something that I don't think a lot of women consider, and that
Mm,
is choosing to go half flat,
mhm.
and not taking the option of either, uh, like a biological reconstruction, which is what I ended up having about 2.5 years after my cancer. That's a whole other COVID story. But so there's that option, and then there's the option of implants. And you made the decision to go flat, and that is a third very viable option. But I don't think a lot of women consider that. What made you choose that option?
Honestly, actually, I should back up and say I really strongly feel like the lens through which I viewed my experience of breast cancer, meaning the diagnosis and the treatment and the decisions I made in those treatment decisions, were all linked to the fact that I had this young child at home that I was eager to get back to. And so I feel like, every option that was presented to me, I was trying to do a calculus of, will this buy me more time with my child? And also, how quickly can I get home again? And so when it came to surgery, she was forefront in my mind again, as well as the hope that I might have another child. And so it was almost like both sides of my chest were answering those two questions. And so I preserved a breast for the hope that I might one day breastfeed another child. And I understood at that point that my risk of having another breast cancer develop in my other breast was not necessarily any greater than someone else, developing a breast cancer. I didn't have any genetic um, mutation that was discovered during this process. And so I decided it was safe for me to keep that other breast. And then for the breast that I was going to remove, I was starting to hear stories from people having to do revision surgeries and different things associated with implants. I didn't know about deep flap or any of those kinds of surgeries at that time. And so for me, it was weighing extra potential surgeries with implants versus one and done. And I went with one and done. And I didn't know anyone else at that time who was choosing aesthetic flat closure. I actually didn't know anyone else who even had breast cancer. My
Yeah.
grandmother did, but in my circle of friends, colleagues, immediate family, no one else had breast cancer. But I happened to see a beautiful picture in a resource center of a woman who had one breast and the other side was flat. And it just planted that seed for me that that might be an option. So I met with the surgeon and I said, I think I just want that, whatever that is. I think that's what I want. I want to just get home as fast as possible. And fortunately for me, he said, yeah, I can do that. No problem. And he gave me the flat result that I wanted. I've now heard stories of people who are flat denied, they get talked out of it or referred to psychiatric
Oh, wow.
evaluation. Their husbands get asked. They sometimes have skin sparing surgery they didn't ask for because the surgery. Fortunately for me, I missed all of that. I just got very flat result that healed the way I wanted it to, and I was back home parenting my child. I should say I was thrown straight into menopause with chemo. So I never did end up having fertility resume for me and ultimately ended up opting not to have another child. But I don't
Mhm.
regret preserving that breast. There have been other benefits that I didn't see when I was going through treatment, such as sensation. And so, yeah. But to your point that not a lot of women, maybe know that option exists or choose to be unilaterally flat, I get, or you know what I mean.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting because now I'm starting to meet more and more women. But it's an interesting thing because if we use a prosthesis or something like that, we can pass as quote unquote normal, like out in the
Mm.
world. And
Yeah.
so it's harder to see us, but I think in a way, this result, the unilateral mastectomy with flat closure, is almost the most illustrative of what breast cancer can do to a body, without actually seeing someone's scars. I
Mm.
choose to go around without a prosthetic. And so if you look at my chest and I have a double D on one side and flat on the other side, if you look at me, you will see what a breast cancer diagnosis can actually mean for life going forward.
That's an amazing perspective, and I love that your thought process included your daughter, um, because
Every step of the way.
yeah, and I think that is it's selfless.
Mm.
You were faced with um, choosing things that had to do with your appearance and also things that had to do with your personal health, and you were concerned with your daughter and any potential children down the road. And I think that is selfless and admirable.
Mm. Thank you
So
for that.
no, you're
Yeah,
welcome.
I think that everyone has a lens that they go through this experience with. And
Mhm.
it just, for me, it happened to be her and this fear that cancer was going to cause would break our bond. We were so new in our little relationship. And
Right.
I felt really, really guilty that I was the one who was causing this potential rift. And so it made sense to me to make decisions with her at the heart of it. But I can see how that might not be someone else's, most forefront thought. And so
Right.
thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Oh, no, you're welcome. I think no matter what decision a woman facing breast cancer chooses, and for whatever reason, it should be validated, and it's their decision. And so for me, I was a little bit older and I had finished having children, and I was pretty close. I was borderline menopause. I was perimenopause,
Mm.
because I had had a hysterectomy due to another medical issue.
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
and so for me, while my children were important and important in my decisions, um, it was a different, I guess maybe it was a different kind of lens, than the one that you had. And I just think that, whether we choose to go through reconstruction or go flat or have a double mastectomy. See, my surgeon refused that option. She said no. She said there was no reason to do it. And I trusted her on that. And so far, so good. But my decision not to get implants was due to the fact that I have two autoimmune diseases, and while it's not a definitive diagnosis, but there is breast implant illness, and it is
Yes.
linked to autoimmune. And like you mentioned, multiple surgeries, you have to have them redone because I think it's 10 years.
Mhm.
They're only good for about 10 years. And, I've already been through enough surgeries. I don't need any more.
Of
Um,
course. And it should be your choice, right?
right,
Like,
right.
yeah, I think it's so. Are you familiar with Dr. Rita Sharon? She is at Columbia University and talks a lot about narrative medicine.
Hmm.
If you're okay with it, I'd love to just share it with you,
Oh,
this
sure,
idea.
sure.
Yeah, so from her perspective, she's training doctors to hear the stories of their patients beyond what might be specific to whatever their ailment is or whatever has brought them to that doctor for the purpose of seeing what this lens is or seeing what this, these decisions are made under what kind of circumstances. And so you just sharing that experience of what you've already been through and what might impact your decision about having an implant in your body, I think is so key to a doctor being able to treat a whole person. And likewise my desire to get home as quickly as possible and also maybe have another child, like all of these factors are going to influence someone's decision. And so I'm just a huge proponent of our doctors knowing our stories, even as it goes beyond what maybe we're sitting there discussing with them. What is your life like? What is the quality of life that you're hoping to either get back to or continue to have, um
Yeah.
beyond what maybe seems like it would be relevant to breast cancer.
Right. No, I agree with that 100%. You reminded me of my plastic surgeon who did my deep flap. She gave me all of my options. She gave me the implant options, and she gave me the deep flap coming from my abdominal, or the other one. I don't know what it's called, but coming from my back. And
Mhm.
we went through each scenario, what would be the long-term impact, and what would be, what I would be facing as recovery. And she said, okay, these are the options, and these are the facts. And now you make your decision. And I came back and I
Yes.
made my decision with the deep flap. And she said, if I was going to tell you what decision to make, that's what I would have chosen for you.
Mm.
And so she says, I'm glad that you looked at, because she asked my reasons, and so given my reasons with the autoimmune and wanting to, I did have a bit of vanity and wanted to be as whole, I
Yes.
guess, as whole as I possibly could have. And so that was my decision, and she applauded it, and I was so grateful for her taking my feelings and my reasoning, medical or not, and making a more a holistic type of decision rather than
Exactly.
just on the medical things. So
Right.
yeah. So there
Oh,
are
I
some,
love that.
yes, there are some very, very good doctors out there. I think I really liked my team. The only person I went and looked sideways on was one of my navigators who said, well, at least, and this was on my very first appointment. I was diagnosed on January 2nd. I was in the doctor's office, where they parade all the doctors in front of you. I was in there on the 9th. And
Mm.
she says, well, at least you'll end up with a set of perky ones when you're done.
Oh my goodness.
And
It's
I
not a
said,
boob job.
I said, I just got diagnosed. I have no idea what's going on at this point.
Right.
It was a whirlwind. And I'm like, that is just not what you say.
No, no. I mean, and likewise, I had people saying that to me too, like, that actually, it was more with regard to, I would say, sex and intimacy and running into people in the chemo lounge who are so much older than me. And, I had questions about fertility and, hormones and all this stuff. And I remember
Mhm.
this attitude just being like, ugh, who needs it? We're done with all of that. And it was just like, well, I'm 35 and now I'm 47 and I'm still not done with it. So,
Yeah.
it's very individual.
Right, exactly. Exactly. I I know many people a lot older than 47 who who are
Right.
not done with their intimacy yet,
Exactly. Exactly.
It doesn't,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't turn off. And that I think was a fear. Now I am a single parent. And so that's not really a consideration for me at this stage in my life. But um, man, just the way people present and the way
Hmm.
people judge, I guess. Oh, well, you're a cancer patient. No, no, I'm a human. Thank you. Oh,
Exactly.
and then with the aromatase inhibitors, because I am,
Mm,
I was hormone positive, you know, they took, these drugs, they take my progesterone and my estrogen away from me, which of course puts everything else out of balance. My testosterone's out of balance. My what is it, DEHA or DHEA? I mix those two up. But
mm.
anyway, but all four of those hormones work together to do they all have individual jobs in the body, but they all work together. And now I have two of them that are missing. Um, and then my big question was, will I still be feminine?
Right.
Will I still cry at commercials? Stupid Folgers
Mm,
commercials on Christmas. I cry. My kids make fun of me
exactly.
because I cry at everything. And, thank goodness that didn't happen. I still cry at stupid commercials. And but I think those are fair questions. When you take away your hormones, oh, am I still going to be a woman? Am I still going, I've lost a breast. Now I'm losing my estrogen, you know.
Right. And I think it's a question of will you still be you at the end of all
Hmm.
of this? Like,
Yeah.
how much of cancer is going to be your identity? And I think the other part of it is how much quality of life you're allowed to ask for. And I had a lot of guilt around that. I felt that, okay, I'm still standing. I had the opportunity to be no evidence of disease. Maybe I don't get to ask for anything more than that. And so it took a
Yeah.
long time to realize that quality of life is just as important as however much time we are given, and we are allowed to ask for more than that. And I think the other side of that is that it's possibly not our oncologists who can answer all those questions. They have their strengths on our team, and we sometimes think they're going to be everything, but they end up being maybe the hub or something, and then they can refer you to other people or say, that's not my wheelhouse, but let's get you who you need. But I think, I just hope for anyone listening to this who feels that they can't ask for anything more than to be standing one more day. I do think that quality of life really matters.
I agree 100%. 100%. And it's a team. It is not just your oncologist, or your plastic surgeon or your cancer surgeon. They all work together. And I think that's a good segue into, um, you also mentioned to me that there were some mental health issues as a result of, was it just being diagnosed young, or was it the treatment? A little bit of both?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think initially it had a lot to do with being diagnosed young. I mentioned that I didn't know anyone else in my life who
Hmm.
was going through cancer or had gone through cancer beyond my grandmother, and she had passed away when I was 18, so I couldn't turn
Okay.
to her and talk about it. And so I just felt really, really alone, and in fact didn't actually meet my first person diagnosed under 40 for 3 years, I think. And I didn't realize how desperate I was for that connection, someone else who knew what it was like to have the sex and intimacy issues we talked about, have career issues, money issues, all the things that were kind of now coming up for me in my survivorship. I didn't realize how much I needed to be able to talk to someone else. And people listening to this now in 2024, that might sound surprising because now we have become so adept at finding each other on social media. We are aware of groups and different things. But in 2012, if those kinds of groups existed, I wasn't clued into to searching for something based on an illness. I didn't
Hmm.
know that cancer would become a group that I wanted to identify with, that I
Right.
wanted to find others in it. And so I became really lonely in that aspect of just needing someone else. Everyone around me had young children like my daughter, but they weren't doing it with cancer. And that seemed very different.
Yes.
And then the other part of that coin, the mental health side, was the aftermath of, treatment had ended, and I found myself kind of dealing with all of the PTSD that we now know exists following a cancer diagnosis and treatment. It was just that feeling of what just happened, and also how do I go forward without, a path. It's so nice, for lack of a better word, that when you become diagnosed, there is an established path. Here is your team and here is your doctors, and we have questions and decisions to make, but they're very narrow. It's like, okay, you have these mastectomy options or whatever, and then you come out the other side of this treatment, if you're so lucky to not be in treatment for your whole life. You come out the other side and it feels like jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. I just felt utterly lost and scared, and I felt like I was handed back my body and told to go live in it. And I didn't think I could trust it. It had caused this cancer to grow in the first place. I didn't know how to live in it again. And in a way, I felt that my body had been the problem the whole time. And so then it took many years to learn, no, my body and I are on the same side. My body is always striving to heal and to be in concert with me. And it took, another lens. I had to look at it through that way and see all the ways that it had been healing and working for me all along, and learn to trust myself again.
That was that. I like how you said that, you didn't necessarily trust your body because you thought your body had caused this cancer to grow. And yeah, I think so often we look at, well, why did this happen? What did I do? Just going back to what you said earlier, what didn't I do, or what didn't I do enough? Um, and sometimes those questions don't have good answers, and sometimes they don't have any answers. I think
Right.
there are some things like, okay, yes, we know we got the flu because we hung out with Uncle Joe, or who had the flu
Sure.
and shook his hand. Okay, that's an obvious one. Cancer is just not as obvious. And at the beginning of
Oh,
October, I did an episode on not the causes, but things that contribute to,
mm,
that could be potential causes, because there is no distinct cause of cancer, breast
right.
cancer. There's no distinct cause or distinct cure. And so, we have to be, mindful of what we do. And there are things we can do to help prevent, but we can't absolutely prevent, because there are so many things that are not in our control. And we just can't get the answer to that question, at least not right now, not with the medicine that we are currently aware of.
Exactly. And I think the same is true for people who develop metastatic cancer, following an early stage. There's so there's so much desire by the general public to want to know, how did this happen? What can I avoid? Especially when it comes to metastatic cancer. And now I can say, being here for 12 years and having many, many, many friends who have either had a metastatic recurrence or were diagnosed metastatic right off the bat. From here, it looks like just bad luck. It's just those are the cards that got dealt. It's not because someone did something. It's not because they didn't get diagnosed in time. Like, it's just bad luck. But the good thing is it doesn't mean the end of life. There's so much happening in science and so much happening to gain time, and people are living longer. And so I don't say any of that to be a bummer. If anyone's listening who's beating themselves up because they think they did something wrong, there aren't any clear reasons why cancer happens or doesn't happen.
Right. Absolutely. Um, yeah. So yes, nobody should be beating themselves up. And Oh, and now I hate that word should. I don't like to should on people.
True,
But we
true. I
don't
mean,
want, yeah, we don't want
hard. Yeah.
anybody beating themselves up because this is not something you did or can control. And so, yes, so please. A friend of mine closes her podcast with "Be gentle with yourself." So
Mm.
please be gentle. But I wanted to address something else that you said about, when you were diagnosed. First of all, it was 12 years ago, and second of all, you were young.
Mhm.
And social media just wasn't what it was. I mean, what it is. 12 years ago, it wasn't. It was just in its infancy stage itself. And so it is hard to go out there and find that community, a
Yes.
community of people who can be your support and be your friend, give you a hand, give you an ear. Um, and I think, and it's so funny because that's come up a couple of times on this podcast in several different episodes about different things. And I think the bottom line is it just boils down to, as human beings, we need human beings.
Mhm.
And we need to
Mhm.
find people who have shared experiences, um, shared walks that we can partner with, that we can walk alongside, or even, you know, somebody who may have stumbled or whatever, you reach your hand down and you pick them up and you help them to continue to
Yeah.
walk. And it is so important. So I would encourage people who are listening, whether you have breast cancer, whether you have cancer, anything, to whatever storm you're walking through, to find some kind of community, in person, online, some kind of community with people who are doing what you're doing. So,
100%. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really changed in my life following my cancer diagnosis. And once I realized how important it was when I first finally laid eyes on this one other person, for me, it was in a writing workshop. And we were instantly connected to each other because of this shared experience. And so now, 12 years on, life has continued to throw lemons my way here and
mhm,
there. And
yeah,
now I find myself immediately thinking, okay, where are the people who understand this
mhm,
new thing that I'm going through? I want to know what they're doing. I want to know that I'm not alone in this. And it's really made a difference in my life, just having that awareness that I'm not the only one. If I'm dealing with it, someone else is too. If someone else,
exactly.
has those questions, then I do too, and we can share and grow together.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned where you met that other person, because that was kind of where I was going with the community aspect, because you actually have a community and writing is your thing. Um,
Yes.
and this is one of the, we always like to talk about the ways you're thriving, and this is one of the ways you're thriving. So I'd love to hear about your writing community.
Yeah. So it's called Wildfire. I decided after that chance encounter with that person all those years ago, and we are still very, very good friends. But I realized how hungry I was for the stories, like you're saying, like just, this humanness that is storytelling and sharing what we have been through and also seeing ourselves in someone else's story. And so for me, that started with wanting to gather those stories together, the young breast cancer experience, gather those stories together. And so I started publishing a magazine, which when I say that out loud sounds crazy because that is not that's not what I was doing prior to cancer. I was a writer. I had been using writing as a tool to process, trauma and different things, but the publishing aspect, I don't know. I got bit by a wild hair one night. And so I've been publishing a magazine ever since then. And along the way, realized that people need a lot of help and encouragement to open up and tell their stories. And that there is significant healing to be had, even if you never choose to share that story. You don't have any aspiration of publishing it. In fact, you would really rather no one ever read it. There's so much healing to be had just from the writing of it. And so I started uh, a community of people who want to write their stories, who want to know how to write their stories. And so I do a lot of writing workshops online now, and it really grew up out of the pandemic, because I was doing it a little bit before that, maybe going to conferences here and there and kind of helping people in person to do writing workshops. But once the pandemic happened and we all realized we have webcams and we have this ability to connect, over distances and wherever we are, it was really a very natural thing in my community because we are so spread out, and that's part of the problem is that we aren't concentrated. It's hard to find each other and in our communities. But with the ability of the internet and social media, we can find each other and then we can put together, young breast cancer writing groups across the world. And so that's what I've been doing these last several years is just meeting people on Zoom and helping them to use the tools of expressive writing, which if for anyone who's not familiar with expressive writing, it's just writing that is much more concerned with how you feel about a thing than it is really like the craft of writing or the reporting of the incident.
Mhm.
It's much more about, what did it look like and how did it feel? And so just helping people get in touch with that, helping them quiet that whatever third grade teacher in the back of their head who's saying, "You're not a writer, like, you don't know how to write," and just say,
Mhm.
like, "This is my experience and this is what happened." And in every single one of my workshops, we give the opportunity for people to share if they want to. And I find that equally healing for the reader as well as the people listening to hear someone else's experience and know again that they're not alone in it.
Oh, that is wonderful. And I love how you, while you encourage sharing with others, it's not a requirement. And so anybody
Not at
listening
all.
who is interested in, if you are a young, if you were diagnosed young, and young is defined as, how do you define diagnosed
Yeah,
young?
I'm glad you asked because I mean, in a lot of ways, it's more of just, where you're kind of at in terms of the stage of life you're in. So, but in wildfire, we define it as you were diagnosed under 50-ish. You could be any age now, but you have that experience of being diagnosed below the median age. A lot of the people in the community can relate to having young children or maybe wanting to have children and are now dealing with infertility. You're not in retirement yet. You weren't in menopause yet. Like there's just a slightly different experience when you're diagnosed, 50-ish and below.
Well, thank you for clearing that because I was going to tell people, and then I thought, wait, maybe we need to define this first.
Well, it's
So,
interesting too because now there are other, groups that exist that didn't exist back then. AYA cancer is defined as under 35, or 15 to 35.
mhm.
So I was really surprised to learn that I counted as a young adult, adolescent cancer survivor. There's groups like the Young Survival Coalition for Breast Cancer, and they define it as under 42. So it's a little bit of a moving target, what young is, but we're in the under 50-ish.
Okay. Well, then I will continue. What I was going to say is that if anybody is young and was young when they were diagnosed and wants to, um, meet April and, you know, learn more about the wildfire community, then I'm going to make sure we get your website in the show notes. Um, and then before we wrap up, I have two questions that I like to ask people. And one is, do you have any warrior words for people who are listening? Any specific advice that, whether it has to do with breast cancer, cancer in general, the mental health aspect of it, any warrior words you would offer to our listeners?
Well, it's going to come as no surprise to you, but I really truly think that telling your story can be the difference between a cancer experience being traumatic and a cancer experience being empowering. So I really truly believe that.
Okay, very good. Yes. We're big on words here on the Warrior Words
Yes.
podcast. And I like to write as well. So I can second the notion that writing is very healing, whether you share it with people or not. Um, and then the last thing that I like to ask people is beauty in the broken. I believe
Mhm.
that no matter what our circumstances are, that there's some beauty that you can either see while you're in it or looking back, you can see some beauty that has come from it. So, wildfire, I think, is definitely in that category. But is there anything else that you can think of from your own personal experience that would classify as beauty in your broken situation?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We talked about my decision to have a unilateral mastectomy with aesthetic flat closure. And to my surprise, and I'm even surprised still saying it out loud to this day, but I feel more attractive in my body now than I actually ever did with symmetry and with two breasts. And I'm sure some of that has come with just growing up. When I was
Mhm.
diagnosed in my 30s, I was still really struggling with who am I and what is this body for and all of those kinds of things. And so fortunately I've had the opportunity to live into my 40s now and I think that's part of it. But yeah, I actually really love my chest. I love my scar. Really love having something a little bit different than everyone else. And yeah, I feel sexier with one breast than I ever did with two.
And that is beautiful.
Thank you.
That is definitely beautiful. Okay, well, as like I said, as we're wrapping up, let everybody know where they can come find you and Wildfire, and we'll make sure to get the links in the description.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have people come over. I offer a free monthly workshop that we were talking about. So I have a freebie that goes out. So you can find that at wildfirecommunity.org. And you can find the magazine there, as well as all my other writing workshops. I have a podcast and we do live events where people read their stories as well. So all of that's at wildfirecommunity.org. And then on Instagram, I'm wildfire_BC_magazine.
Okay, we'll make sure to get those in for everybody. So thank you, April. I appreciate your time, your wisdom, your bravery, and your beauty. Thank you for coming on to the Warrior Words podcast with us today.
Thank you, Heather.
In episode 44 with Carrie Bishop, I brought up the idea of lenses and how we choose to look at things. Today, April also brought up lenses, those that help us make decisions. And I don't think they're very different. We use these lenses to view situations and then make our decisions based on what the lenses tell us. For April, she used her lens of motherhood to view her cancer and to make the best decisions for her health and that of her family, especially her new daughter. And she brought up an important point. Just because medicine has preset solutions for all the various diagnoses, that doesn't mean that they're always right for our specific situation. For example, in April's situation, she had the option of a double mastectomy, but chose not to take it so that she might be able to breastfeed any future children. On the other hand, I asked about the option of a double mastectomy and was told no. She even brought up the fact that at the time she was diagnosed, and even earlier, maybe more so earlier, women were questioned and referred to psychiatry even if they considered going flat. I don't understand that. But it's one of their preset solutions. So I am grateful that this is not the case today. But that doesn't mean medicine's solutions work for every human being who walks into a doctor's office. Now, I think the lesson here, though, is to listen to what the doctors advise and then evaluate it based on the lens that is your specific life, because everyone's life situations are different. Medicine can't possibly consider every single option. Now, caveat here, I am not saying that there's anything wrong with medicine. You still need to go see your doctors and listen to their advice. Now, what I am saying is that to evaluate their educated advice through the lens that is your specific life, which brings me to something else April said in two different ways. She said it two times, but through my lens, they are very similar things, and maybe yours too. The first was when she mentioned Dr. Sharon, I believe is how she pronounces her name, and her concept of narrative medicine. This kind of piggybacks on what I was just saying. The second time was when she was discussing her wildfire community and her workshops. She mentioned expressive writing. I think the narrative medicine and the expressive writing have something in common: sharing stories. And April even said it directly. When we share expressively, we allow others to see themselves in our stories. And you may notice that is exactly what the tagline says on my cover art for this podcast. By sharing our journeys through all the storms of life that we experience, including how we come out on the other side, we allow someone else to realize that they are not alone. Now, not every detail has to be the same. April and I have both similarities and differences in our cancer journeys. But we have now shared our stories with each other and can bond over the similarities and learn from the differences. So I ask you, what part of your story can you share so that someone, somewhere, can feel a little less alone? Something to think about this week. So until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.